Oh, it's the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful play. You lucky people.
We are lucky. And we're discovering it in this ensemble is rich, and it'll never be assembled again.
Yeah.
Exactly. So why don't we start with no more introduction than that?
So my question is about, so from prose to verse, there's that, relationship of heightened, thank you for the mic, that heightenedness of, but still with the truthfulness. Can you talk about the relationship between those two and song?
Gosh.
And how to, and the truthfulness exposed in song.
Many different relationships between verse and prose and song. But in Twelfth Night, yes, verse is of course connected to people of wealth or people of authority, as Shakespeare wrote his kings and queens and nobles. Earlier this afternoon, I was talking about a scene in Henry VI where Mr. Iden, a nobleman, encounters the rebel, the peasant rebel Jack Cade in his garden, and Iden speaks in verse and Cade speaks in prose. So Shakespeare's written a scene where you exchange between verse and prose in order to say you're upper class and you're lower class. I think that of course, was only a device for that particular scene, and then he wonderfully shifts between the two possibilities. In a play like Much Ado About Nothing, a huge amount of the play is in prose, because he chooses to do this Battle of the Sexes play in a very kind of contemporary to his audience way, contemporaneous, I suppose I mean, so that everyone will get all the innuendos of those prose battles, although Don Pedro is in verse and Claudio is in verse and Hero is in verse, but then Dogberry and the Watch are all in prose and so on. So he's playing with those things. Okay, in Twelfth Night, I think it's not only that Shakespeare is doing class distinction. In fact, in many ways, he's not doing class distinction. He is giving verse, giving poetry to people involved in love stories. And then below stairs or in some sort of servant position, you have all the exchanges in prose, and that includes Malvolio, who so passionately wants to be a noble, who passionately is prepared to believe that Olivia has got the hots for him, and that he's going to be ordering people like Toby Belch all over the place, and so on.
In our production, Malvolio is played by a woman as a woman.
Absolutely, and why not? I mean, Shakespeare. But Shakespeare is after a very particular target. When he originally wrote Malvolio, because Malvolio, the other characters in the play call him a Puritan, and what they mean is that he is a fundamentalist, Protestant, religious maniac, or he claims to be, and therefore everything is according to that fundamentalist set of beliefs as there in society. And Shakespeare very, very much wants to take the mickey out of Malvolio, because who was trying to close down the theatres in London? The Puritans. There were various Puritan groups and councils and so on. That's why the theatres, to begin with, theatres in Shakespeare's time were north of the River Thames, because the Puritan councils, that they were outside the city bounds, and therefore the Puritans couldn't close them down. And then they eventually moved across the river to the south bank, where no Puritan activity at all. It was all restricted to the City of London, and they were on the south bank. Otherwise, the Puritans would have stopped. So you can imagine Shakespeare is determined to have a lot of fun at the expense of Malvolio and Puritanism. But just to finish on the language, I think Shakespeare says verse for the lovers, therefore verse for Viola and verse for Orsino and verse for Olivia. And then I'm adding to that, it's verse for a lot of verse anyway, for Sebastian, and verse for Antonio. And I don't know whether you're at all investigating this, but when I was studying the play, I came to the conclusion that in addition to all the obvious love stories, there is that extra love story that Antonio is in love with Sebastian, that there is man in love with man, and when he says, "I do adore thee so," and so on, it's absolutely for real. So there are various losers at the end of Twelfth Night, aren't there? Poor Aguecheek, who has been duped from beginning to end, believing that maybe he's a candidate to marry Olivia and there's no chance. And then I'm sure you're very, very aware of this, when Toby insults Aguecheek publicly at the end, having constantly said that they were in it together. He calls him an ass. And so, I mean, it's just so upsetting that Aguecheek is left with nothing, and Malvolio has to leave and will never return, and he's left with nothing. But also Antonio is left with nothing. Antonio has followed Sebastian all the way through, and then eventually it's goodbye, Antonio. So verse for lovers.
Sure.
I have a related question.
You're a Malvolio, if ever I saw.
Yes. I haven't dove into this yet, but Malvolio's last lament at the end of the play is in verse. Do you have any thoughts about why that is, or opinions, or?
You mean, "I'll be revenged upon the whole pack of you"?
Lady, you have, pray you peruse that letter, you must not now deny it is your hand. That...
Just let me have a quick look at it, the bit that you're referring to. Yes, because he is in contact with Olivia, and because he's been led to believe that maybe a relationship could happen with Olivia, then as he speaks to her, he's trying to be as refined and noble as he possibly can. And of course, there's something very moving about it, that this guy's been completely duped and ridiculed, and is saying, would you please explain to me why this has been happening? And so really for the first time in the play, we have some sympathy with Malvolio because he's obviously, he's left with nothing. I think Shakespeare gives him verse at that moment because he's trying to be aristocratic, he's trying to be noble, he's trying to suffer as a gentleman would, and so on. And he's still, in some peculiar way, wanting to connect with Olivia. Surely we could have become a pair. So I think that's the explanation for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, playing action to the end, yeah? Still playing. Going for it. Next up. Yeah, great.
Oh, that was a very big move.
So with verse, it's easy enough, I guess, to find the rhythm of it. You breathe at the ends of lines. My question is about prose and how to find the rhythm of that, because all you have really are the thoughts to lock onto. So I wonder if you could say something about finding the rhythm of prose.
I think that Shakespeare, particularly by the time of Twelfth Night, with the prose passages, with Toby and Aguichik and Maria and a certain element of Feste from time to time, I think he's just creating modern drama. I think he's saying that this prose is completely naturalistic. You can say something and then a beat and then have your next thought, or you can be saying something and then have your next thought because your next thought jumps ahead of you. I think he's not saying, please, will you make sure that you respect my punctuation and my grammar. I don't think he's saying anything like that. He's saying this is all spontaneous and it's happening in the moment. And it's wonderful, isn't it, with the Belch, Aguichik Morale stuff, that they're, as it were, below stairs. There's nothing public going on. It's all having a laugh and having too much to drink, and then a wonderful opportunity to take the mickey out of Malvolio when he comes down because they're making too much noise and so on. And Shakespeare knows. I mean, remember, Shakespeare's audience is a divided audience in many ways, all the way around the stage, all the way at ground level. The audience were called the groundlings, and they stood. So the stage was quite high, and therefore they stood to watch the performance. Then there was a row of just 2 seats deep for any kind of nobility or aristocratic audience who would pay more for that. And then there was a level above that where supposedly it was scholars and writers and observers and so on who didn't want to mingle with the crowd, because the crowd, almost certainly, the groundlings, when a play was going on, they didn't observe the rules that we are supposed to observe in theatre these days, that play begins. You might say, did you understand? But, right? Everything silent. I think Shakespeare's audience, people were going, oh my God, did you see what he said? Fucking hell, that's it. I mean, people were talking and shouting and so. So the groundling audience, I mean, Shakespeare does refer to that audience sometimes and that audience at other times. Slightly, in Henry V, in some of those choruses, he plays one off against the other. But I would say the Belch and Maria and Ege Confesti scenes below stairs and so on, they would be very, very much for the entertainment of the groundlings. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I watched an interview or workshop with Sir Ian McClellan where he talked about the Scottish play, and he says in it that people say that when you do Shakespeare, when you perform Shakespeare, you just need to find the tune of the words and everything goes well. But to Sir Ian McClellan, it's not that you find the sense of the words and then you let everything else take care of itself. Earlier you said that the rhythm is really important to the meaning of Shakespeare. And I guess my question is, in how much as an actor do we, when we perform Shakespeare, do we just play the musicality of the language, and how much do we actually, create or...
I hear you. I keep talking, don't I, about Shakespeare's continuing quest to find more and more naturalism in verse and more naturalism in prose. And by the time that we get to great works like King Lear, it's almost impossible to work out whether they're in verse or prose. Shakespeare is so wanting the language to connect with his entire audience at every level. That said, there was, of course, a great Shakespeare tradition in England, and by the time it got to the 19th century, there were so many actors who became famous, like Kean, Garrick. Garrick was 18th century. Irving, actors who were hugely praised by people writing about the theatre at the time. And every time they would say, this actor is so wonderful because he is so natural. These different writers would say, more than anybody that we have seen in the past, this actor is so natural. And you gradually build up towards the end of Irving's career, the actor Sir Henry Irving, when recording was invented, sound recording. And so, after all of that tradition, you are able to hear Sir Henry Irving doing a speech by William Shakespeare in a performance, and everyone is saying he's so natural. And this is an exciting moment, and you switch on. And Irving is talking like that the whole time. I mean, it's absolutely wildly, crazily melodramatic and over the top, and so. And then you discover that when I grew up, there was a great actor called Sir John Gielgud, and John Gielgud also had that sort of tremor in his voice when he was playing Shakespeare. It was always that. And then, in contrast, Laurence Olivier began to do it that much more real, and Olivier then kind of launches new Shakespeare. I mean, I'm going off script here now, but then I will never, ever, ever forget. I was assistant on a production of Henry V, and Henry the King was being played by a young actor who previously played Prince Hal, and so now he was young Henry V. This actor was called Ian Holm, and he was utterly incredible, revolutionary. He invented contemporary Shakespeare acting. I'll just give you an example. The Crispin Day speech that Olivier had done on a horse, Crispin Day, and all of that. And that was always the way of doing it. And Ian invented this himself, that Llewellyn was reading something and he looked over his shoulder and then said, "Oh, tomorrow is St. Crispin's Day." And then had this idea of I could encourage people by talking about Crispin's Day on this day. We band of brothers, we happy few. He was making it up as he went along. This wonderful speech that Olivier had done as a vast proclamation was coming moment by moment, and soldiers gradually beginning to gather round and getting excited. And then there was an older soldier, and Ian Holm went, "Old men forget, but he'll remember what feats he did this day." I mean, it was just staggeringly real. It was like the invention of contemporary Shakespeare acting that I keep going on about. So I'm sort of partly answering your question and partly avoiding it. But I think in verse and prose, whether we're in a space this big, you lucky people, I love working small and intimate. I absolutely love it. Or whether you're in a huge auditorium with 1,000 seats, you've still got to try and make it real. Next question.
So I had a bit more of a character-centric question. I'm playing Mariah, which is fun.
Yes?
Sure. Yes, it is. But you mentioned there are losers at the end of the play. There's Malvolio and Antonio. And I don't consider, it ends in a marriage, so I don't think it's a loss or anything necessarily. But she doesn't appear in the last act at all, which I don't really understand, because everyone comes out at the end. Everyone comes out and everyone's married and everyone's having a great time, but she's gone and just disappeared. So I kind of took it as you mentioned everything being about love, maybe for each other, but in my own, as an actor and character discovery, I find a greater love in a woman's freedom of her wit and being tricky and clever and finding a freedom and
clever.
Yes. So I suppose that's a question.
No, I think Mariah's hugely important role in the play, because she is an extraordinary bridge, isn't she, between what the aristocrats are up to and what's happening below stairs. She is hugely responsible for the whole deception of Malvolio and how that comes about and how it should work and so on. So, what I think is also suggested in the play is that Belch is constantly down there below stairs because he wants to be with Maria. And at the end of the play, we are told that Maria and Belch are getting married. And that in itself is a rule-breaking thing. Sir Toby Belch is going to marry a servant called Maria. But there's something wonderful about that. There's something about the breadth of spirit of Toby and the cleverness of Maria. And yes, of course, and they're going to be a wonderful couple. Oh dear. I hope you can sneak into that last scene somehow.
I want to bring her on with Toby.
Oh yeah.
Right,
I say go for it.
Yeah.
I say let's have them together because it makes sense of so much of those late night gatherings and having too much to drink and all of that. But Maria, I think, is going to make certain that Toby has something of a happy life. Alas, Aguecheek is not going to have a happy life. Aguecheek is out in the cold and doesn't have anybody to turn to at the end.
And less money.
And indeed, he's been taken for quite a lot of money by Toby. Yeah, but I think Shakespeare is trying to resolve so many different things in the last scene. Have you ever come across or read the play Cymbeline? I'm only mentioning it because it's one of the very, very late plays. It's probably the second last thing that Shakespeare wrote. And there's something like 7 different plot lines that go through the play. And in the last scene, I have a theory that Shakespeare was in the pub one night in the Mermaid Tavern, and he was with some fellow writers, and they were all having a lot to drink. And the fellow writers said, well, we want to make a bet with you. We bet you can't resolve all of those plots in Cymbeline in the last scene. And Will says, absolutely no problem. Of course I can. Cymbeline is crazy. I mean, plot line after plot line after plot line in the last scene gets resolved. But it's almost like you couldn't set out to do that. But it's a challenge that has turned up late in the day, and somehow he's going to manage it. Shakespeare manages to bring all of those things to their different endings. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I actually have a question. He's doing something similar in Twelfth Night, wrapping up a lot of things.
Well, sure, so what we were getting at. Yeah,
and mentioning the sea captain, in fact, somehow cojoins Malvolio with the sea captain, which is a little crazy. But of all the plot lines that he wraps up last, it's Malvolio is the ultimate one who comes on even after Sir Toby and the Andrew Aguecheek. Why is this thing with Malvolio the last one who then says, I don't forgive you, and runs off and says, a plague on you all?
I'll be revenged, indeed, is what he says. I think it comes in that order because resolving the Malvolio plotline is in so many ways the most impossible for us to imagine how it's going to be. And because however you approach it, the Malvolio plotline is ultimately the biggest plotline that Shakespeare does in the story, particularly when, I don't know whether you've included the scene, sometimes it does get cut, but when Malvolio is in prison and Feste is taunting him. I mean, it's so shocking. It's so shocking, it's so distressing that Malvolio is beginning to lose his mind and Feste is wanting him to lose his mind and so on. So how do you resolve the Malvolio thing? And in the end, Shakespeare is saying when you are a fake like Malvolio. He posed as being a Puritan, but he actually didn't have that profound religious belief. And he is controlling a household as a steward when in fact the whole time he is hoping against hope that he's going to be running the household and marrying the Countess and all of that. He's got those ambitions. Then the moment of Malvolio confronting Olivier and saying, why has all of this happened? Is there's a kind of comedic climax because we've been so involved in the duping of Malvolio, and there's an emotional climax that somebody has been made a total fool of, and is it going to be part of a happy ending? And then Malvolio finishes with, "I'll be revenged upon the whole pack of you." It's, of course, a devastating statement about him that he can't contemplate forgiveness. He can't say, all right, I get the point. He can't do that. He can only threaten, and he disappears. But Shakespeare's also saying, you see, the trouble is, the real Puritans can't come to terms with forgiveness either, especially the ones who want to close down this theatre.
And remarkable at the end that Orsino then takes the people who have subjected Malvolio to this torture and entreat her, in our case, to a peace. So Orsino actually achieves what he's supposed to have been all play long, finally through Viola, and has this act of compassion to bring Malvolio back into the fold, which is extraordinary in its own right. This act of compassion and forgiveness, in a way.
Yeah.
I have some sort of question. I'm Catherine. I play Olivia. I know that we've done a lot of work with just not just thinking about the content in the play, but what's happened prior to all the events in the play, such as Olivia's father and her brother dying, and how that's affected her life now. And I would just assume that when her father and her brother were around, even then she didn't have much choice, because as a woman in nobility, I just don't see how much choice she had. And we often talk about our ethical core and how I see it as her finally having like this choice. And that's why she goes after Cesario. But I guess like my question is, why not Orsino, who she claims is this noble of great estates, a fresh and stainless youth, but she goes for Cesario? Is this like a sexuality thing, that Cesario is more feminine? Is it that she's a masochist and just, loves the fact that he sort of, denies her? Or is this her finally having that choice?
No, I think your questions are all very, very important and very well expressed. First of all, I think Shakespeare would say, falling in love is the most inexplicable thing. Sometimes you would imagine there are two people who meet and they seem to be like they're made for each other, but it doesn't work. It doesn't happen. And then sometimes we say, I never expected those two to get together. They were like chalk and cheese, but then somehow there's just something wonderful. So Orsino is in love, he says, if music be the food of love, play on, I'm in love, another messenger. I'm in love with this idea of the Countess Olivia and so on. And it doesn't work for her. It's not he just isn't who she connects with. Isn't it inexplicable? But love is like that. But then, to pick up on your point, see, the further example, Olivia is in mourning. She is in mourning because her brother has died, and now she is in authority. She's uncomfortable being in authority. If only the men in my family were alive, but now I am the Countess Olivia, yes? Okay. And she meets this young man called Cesario. This young man, Cesario, is in mourning because Sebastian, he believes, is dead. There's a connection. There just is a connection. Something, some wavelength, some tremor, something in the atmosphere. You're in mourning, and something about this young person, somehow understanding that and somehow trying to give courage through it and so on. There's just a connection. Now, obviously, there's also the all-important ingredient that they are almost certainly of an age. They are both in their very late teenage or 20 years old. They connect in that way. And there used to be a theatre tradition where Olivia was cast as a sort of middle-aged-ish countess, and so, ooh, hey, I'm getting the hots for this youngster. I think it's not about that at all. Absolutely not about that at all. It's vulnerable Olivia finding a connection with this young guy, this not particularly confident young guy who is now the new messenger. And I want to go on seeing you. I want to go on talking to you. I feel a connection to you, is how it develops. And then the fates intervene because a twin brother called Sebastian turns up, and Olivia is even more excited about Sebastian than about Cesario. They're absolutely identical, and yet there's a bit of something else.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Paul. I'm
Paul.
playing, he's been mentioned a couple of times, Sir Andrew Aguachik.
Yes, yes.
Yes. And I'm also just wondering in terms of, I'm still discovering how to play him. If you recommend playing him more naive, childlike, is he a complete fool? Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could give me some.
I understand. I understand exactly what you're getting at. I think we come to understand pretty soon, don't we, that Andrew is being manipulated by Toby. They've met because they both have some sort of aristocratic tag. So Sir Toby Belch meets Sir Andrew Aguachik, and therefore, yes, of course, you should come and stay with us. What Andrew doesn't understand is that he's being fed a very considerable pack of lies from Toby, saying honestly, I'll make absolutely sure while you're here that you will get to have a relationship with the Countess Olivia, and you will get to marry her, and so on. Honestly, trust me, I'm on your side. We'll get it all sorted out. So Aguachik, terribly dependent. Oh, wouldn't that be amazing if that dream could come true? Totally dependent on Toby, and consequently, when one is totally dependent, one's more likely to believe the lies than not, because you want to believe that like. So, I think unquestionably, Andrew is gullible. I don't think that's the same as stupid. I don't think that's the same as childish. I just think he's of a slightly nervous disposition. He knows if he's going to woo this countess, he's going to need help. He's not any good at wooing. You know, he's possibly tried it a couple of times before, and it hasn't worked out. She's disappeared, he's still believing there's going to be this opportunity, and life is going to be wonderful. And he doesn't understand that Toby is laughing at him, laughing at Andrew's expense over and over and over again. So when, at the end of the story, Toby tells the truth, horribly tells the truth, and says to Andrew, "You ass." I mean, it's totally devastating for Andrew, because he really has believed that he was best friends with Toby. He's believed it. And therefore, well, when you say child, I don't know. I think almost certainly he's tearful. I mean, realization that everything you've been told was a bunch of lies. Devastating. But it's that equation between you so want something to be true that you allow yourself to believe that it's true. Andrew is gauche and he can't dance properly. And he probably is out of tune when they're singing, and who knows? You know, all of these things can contribute to the fun.
So my name is Min. I watched a video to the link that Hunter College gave it to us, and in that video it was like 1970s, and I do not remember the lines and the play. It wasn't from the Twelfth Night. There was a great actor, and you were directing him, and maybe it was for the TV show. And when I hear his like lines, I was missing something. And then you said, okay, how about saying this line in this way? And then like he followed your direction, and then I felt the life in those lines. So my question is, English is my second language, and for the prose, you say like at the you already mentioned that at the end of the lines you have time for your thoughts and feelings. But like, how can you make the connection at the same time you are saying in a so natural way, you are giving life to the sentence as you did on your short videos? I felt that.
Well,
so, yeah, that was my question.
I think the answer to your question is you just keep on working at it. Because of course, you know, that we refer to Shakespeare's plays, don't we, as written in heightened language. We use that phrase, heightened language. As I've said now 1,000 times, and I apologize, but I keep propounding that when you work at it, that heightened language, which can look very formal and very poetic on the page, when you work at it, you can make it real. You can get to the point where each sequence it's not something that you're reciting, it's not something you've learned off a page, it's something that's happening. You are thinking it, you are creating it. I've said this, I think I was saying it yesterday, that in music theatre, it's very, very, very similar, that when you've got a big song, if what you do is sing it like, I've learned this, and the composer wrote it this way, and I've got a very strong voice, and so I'm going to do my recital, it will mean almost nothing to an audience at a musical. But if you sing that song like, this is my character, and this song is coming out of my character in this situation, and I'm now inventing these words, I'm almost inventing this music in order to, so it has to be the actor's determination to find what is real, how it can be real, and sometimes you were talking about, you know, prose and a pause and so on. Yes, if you can make it absolutely real, that there is a moment where you need a pause and then you go on talking, yes, use the pause. Or if there's a moment where you're talking and you're getting another idea as you're talking and you hurry and then you don't pause because you're on to the next. But it's real. It's real. You're finding your real response to that. Now, I've always wanted to take this to the absolute extreme. So not only plays by William Shakespeare, but and not only working on musicals, but working in the opera house. And I've worked in a couple of opera houses where they all say, so are we meeting and going to do our sing through? And I say, no. What we're going to do for the first 4 or 5 days is we're going to do improvisation exercises. We're going to become a total ensemble. We're going to be able to invent anything we like. We're going to be able to make a fool of ourselves in front of each other. And then we're going to improvise situations in this opera. And then we're going to put those situations into our own words. And now, okay, we've done our impro. We're now going to read. No one's going to sing a note. We're going to read the text of this opera like it's a totally naturalistic play. You have got to find the real ingredient. And now we are going to do the music, but just find those real ingredients in that opera. And I promise you, with Mozart, with Tchaikovsky, you can find absolutely real things. And so it's the same way in for me every single time. You've got to start with how can you make it real?
Can we do 2 more? Yeah.
Hello, my name's Fernando.
Hi.
I'm Fernando. I'm playing Sebastian. So my question is basically, when I read Sebastian and what I feel about his character is that he's a very humble and noble in the sense of that he has a religious aspect to him, that he always is trying to look for God in the sense, and whenever
nice to look for
for God and religion, his purpose in life. And that's why I think that he has that urge to leave Antonio after their their time together, because he's this is no longer my calling, and he has to seek forth something else. And at the end, he's maybe it's Duke Orsino's court, it's a greater calling to go to him. At the end of going to Duke Orsino's court, he finds his sister, he gets married and all that stuff. But my question was, basically, whenever he goes into the town, to Illyria, and he meets Toby and Sir Toby and Sir Andrew, and there's a fight going on, and he's what is happening? The world's turning upside down. But then he automatically sees Olivia, and he marries her. Basically, he accepts her proposal, right? As soon as he meets her. Yeah. So I was just curious about that sense of what he was probably thinking in that, was it love at first sight?
Well, I was just about to interrupt you by saying love at first sight. Yeah. If I had, we would have said the phrase at exactly the same time. I think that's what's being written about. Uh-huh. Sorry, but I interrupted you.
No,
there was another bit to your question.
No, you could go ahead if you have something else to say.
No. Well, I mean, I absolutely agree. Love at first sight. Sebastian, as I keep saying, Shakespeare was the father of twins, and the male twin, Hamlet, died. And so there has to be an ingredient in Shakespeare's writing that Shakespeare wants to admire Sebastian. He wants to say, this is a good boy. This twin brother is a good young man. And so the leaving of Antonio, I mean, look, there are any number of ways of playing it. There can be the slight discomfort that Antonio seems to be becoming too, I want to be with you every minute of the day, and so on, and I do adore thee so, and so on. Just a little bit, and therefore, probably this is the moment where I'm going to thank you and we're going to say bye-bye and farewell, and we'll go our separate ways, and so on. Mm-hmm. Yes? But also, Sebastian is aware that in the shipwreck he has survived, and he doesn't know who else or what else may have happened. It's a huge open question in his mind, and that's going to influence his behavior, isn't it? I'm in a foreign country. I've got to behave well. I've got to make my way. I've got to try and find a life. I probably lost my sister forever, is somewhere in his mind, or always. So I think Sebastian isn't being heartless or in any way mean-spirited in breaking up with Antonio. I think it's the time has come. I've got to stand on my own 2 feet, and then he gets involved in a lot of very, very weird circumstances where people seem to know him and he doesn't know them, and then everything to do with some duel that is to go on, and so on. I'm in a foreign country, and I think it's called Madland. I mean, everything I encounter is absolutely nuts. And then we've arrived at love at first sight. I mean, he sees Olivia, and Olivia, for him, is absolutely a dream come true. It's just this magical person. And he talks about her almost in a fairy tale way, doesn't he? That almost like an apparition, and it's totally love at first sight. What he doesn't understand is how she seems to be so thrilled that he's responding to her, like in some previous life they might have known each other, because she is totally available. I mean, she's saying, let's do it. I mean, let's get together. I can't wait. And so that soliloquy about, am I dreaming? Is this for real? How can this be happening? But then, what Shakespeare has in store is, am I allowed to say?
You are.
I mean, going back to Shakespeare's biography, the last scene of Twelfth Night, where Viola and Sebastian see each other. Do I stand there? It's absolutely indescribable that somebody dressed exactly the same as you, looking exactly the same as you, is standing looking at you. It's like an apparition, and yet there's also a knowledge of, I know who that is, and therefore the sharing of the information about their father, about their past, and then the realization, the confirmation that it's Viola. It's Sebastian and Viola. It's twins. And they've found each other, and they're both alive. Olivia says, how most wonderful. Yes, mustn't be a laugh, it mustn't be a joke at that moment. It's got to be incredibly emotional. That the word wonderful means full of wonder. It's absolutely amazing. And why am I saying that? Because William Shakespeare is saying, my daughter Judith has just discovered that her young brother Hamlet is alive after all. I mean, it's his father's dream. It's if only my boy hadn't died, if only he could have arrived back. And his way, Shakespeare's way of just believing for a few moments that they could be back together is the last scene of Twelfth Night. That's what he's writing about. So all I'm going to say is, I know there's temptation that you can get big laughs at that final moment with Olivia thinking, oh wow, I got two for the price of one. But I would say it's got to be that it's the moment where we all need to get out our handkerchief, that most wonderful, that this miracle has happened.
Thank you so much.
I think on that beautiful note, we should say thank you. Thank you.